A pleasant day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Arnel Mindo, and today I will be discussing to you climate throughout the ages. So before anything else, let us get to know the learning objectives pertaining to this particular topic. So first is you will get to know the influence of ocean on rapid climate change. And then second, you will get to describe the temperature trends during the past 1,000 years. And lastly, you'll be able to elaborate the temperature trends during the past 100 plus years. So these key terminologies that are presented will be crucial to better understand the topic as we go along. So first key terminology is MYA, which stands for million years ago. Next is the Pleistocene epoch or the Ice Age. It is a glacial period that started 2.5 million years ago. And next is the Holocene epoch or the interglacial period. It is a warmer period that interrupted the Ice Age or the Pleistocene epoch. And fourth is the alpine glaciers, glaciers that form in high mountains and travel through valleys. Next is the continental glaciers. This type of glacier form in a central location with ice moving outward in all directions. And lastly, thermoline circulations. These are ocean circulations produced by differences in temperature and or salinity. So disclaimer lang guys, if you are not that good in geography like me, it would be better for you to bring out your maps na naamo diha, or better yet, utilize Google Maps in order for you to better understand this topic. So now let us formally start our discussion. So today I'm going to tell you a story about the Earth's climate throughout the ages. So kung atong balikan ang history about sa global climate, makaingon ta nga mas init pa compared sa karon. Kung asa ang mga polar regions kay wala pay ice and naay mga babag sa pagpadayon sa kainit niini. Mao na ang ginatawag as glaciation. Some of these geologic glaciation kay nahitabo about 700 million years ago, known as the Sturtian glaciation, and 300 million years ago, known as the Paleozoic ice house or ice age. Ug ang pinaka-recent, which is called Pleistocene epoch or pwede nato tawagon as Ice Age. So kaning Ice Age nagsugod about 2.5 million years ago. So a short story about sa climate conditions before pa aning Ice Age started about 6.5 million years ago kung asa mas init pa sa climate ron o kung asa wala pa ng mga ice cap sa polar regions. Tapos by 55 million years ago, nagbugnaw na sad, murag inyong relasyon, char kung asa ni appear ang polar ice. So habang gapabugnaw inyong relasyon, char, ang temperature di ay gapabaga sad ang ice kung asa by 10 million years ago na coveran og deep blanket of ice ang Antarctica. Meanwhile, snow and ice began to accumulate in high mountain valleys of the northern hemisphere and alpine glaciers soon appeared. And finally, by 2.5 million years ago, continental glaciers appeared in the northern hemisphere, which signified the beginning of the Ice Age or the Pleistocene epoch. Pero despite sa glacial period nga gapadayon, naay mga periods nga nag-intervene sa pag-continue sa glaciation, and one of which is called interglacial periods nga naglast about 10,000 years or more. So the most recent North American glaciers reach their maximum thickness and extend about 18,000 to 22,000 years ago. At that time, average temperatures in Greenland were about 10 degrees Celsius, which is lower at present, and the tropical average temperatures were about 4 degrees Celsius, which is lower than they are today. Because a great deal of water was in form of ice over land, mas mubo ang level sa tubig compared karon at about 120 meters. Since low ang tubig, na mga land areas nga pwede na makita, like Bering Land Bridge, a strip of land that connected Siberia to Alaska. Ug tungod ana, posible ang migration sa animals and tao from Asia to North America. The ice then began to retreat about 14,000 years ago. So as you can see in the graph, as surface temperature slowly rose, producing a warm spell, murag iyang love nimo, char. And by 12,700 years ago, the average temperature suddenly dropped and northeastern North America and Northern Europe reverted back to glacial conditions. So, namugnaw na sad. Tapos, ang cold spell or younger dryas ni kalitrag kauman. Tapos, ang temperature ni kalitag pataas sa uban areas. Looking at the graph, by about 18,000 years ago, the mean temperature dropped by as much as 2 degrees Celsius over Central Europe. During this cold period, which was not experienced worldwide, the European alpine timberline fell about 200 meters. The cold period ended, temperatures began to rise, and by about 6,000 years ago, the continental ice sheets over North America were gone. Uh, this warm spell during the current interglacial period or Holocene epoch is sometimes called the mid-Holocene maximum, and because this warm period favored the development of plants, it is also known as the climatic optimum. Tapos, pag-abot na sad around 5,000 years ago, nibugnaw na sad kung asa namalik ang alpine glaciers pero walay apil ang continental glaciers. It is interesting to note that ice core data from Greenland reveal that rapid shifts in climate from ice age conditions to a much warmer state took place in as little as 3 years over central Greenland around the end of the Younger Dryas. Kung tanaw ninyo ang graph, makita sad sa data nga naay mga similar rapid shifts of climate na hitabo kapila dapit sa end of ice age. So, what could cause such rapid changes in temperature? So, one possible explanation is the ocean's influence on rapid climate change. Okay, now let us discuss the influence of the ocean to rapid climate changes. During the last glacial period, the climate around Greenland and probably other areas of the world such as Northern Europe underwent shifts from ice age temperatures to much warmer conditions in a matter of years. Now, what could bring about such large fluctuations in temperature over such a short period of time? It now appeared that a vast circulation of ocean water, known as the conveyor belt, plays a major role in the climate system. So, makita sa figure of movement sa ocean conveyor belt or the thermoline circulation. So, ang circulation nagsugod sa North Atlantic doon sa Greenland and Iceland. Kung asa, ang tubig is salty and gakabugnaw tungod sa cold Arctic air masses. O kining dense and cold water musink and flow padulong sa deep Atlantic Ocean around South Africa and into the Indian Ocean and onto the Pacific Ocean. So, sa North Atlantic. Habang gapasink ang cold water, kasabay ana, gapataas ang warm water gikan sa lower latitudes. Habang gapataas ning mga tubiga, ang evaporation nga kakahitabo kay ginapa-increase ang salinity sa tubig or mas paspas ang pagdissolve sa salt since warmer man ang water. So pagtaas aning salt dense water, bubugnaw gyapon na siya which produces incredible amount of tropical heat to the North Atlantic during winter. And the heat is transferred to the overlying atmosphere and ang evaporation kay ginamoisten niya ang air. Tas naay kusog nga westerly winds nga pwede magdala ani init nga moisture padulong sa Northern and Western Europe na maging dahilan para mas warm ang winter nila despite sa latitude nila. Also, ocean sediment records, along with ice core records from Greenland, suggest that the giant conveyor belt has switched on and off during the last glacial period. Such events have apparently coincided with rapid changes in climate. So, dako jud ang iyang effect sa pag-change sa climate. Example ana is kung kusog ang conveyor belt, winters in Northern Europe tend to be wet and relatively mild. Pero kung ang conveyor belt is weak or stops altogether, mas bugnaw ang winter sa Northern Europe. This switching from period of milder winters to one of severe colds shows up many times in climate record. Isa ana is katong Younger Dryas kung asa gipakita kung unsa kapaspas posible nga mag-change ang climate. Isa sa pwede mag-switch off sa conveyor belt is kung naay fresh water nga masagol sa water nga nahitabo around 11 years ago atong Younger Dryas kung asa ang fresh water sa usa ka dako nga glacial lake nag-start up nag-start og flow padulong sa North Atlantic ug tungod sa entry sa freshwater, na-reduce niya ang salinity sa surface water kung asa nag-stop na jud og sink ang water. Ang conveyor belt ato nga time kay nag-stop ang mechanism for about 1,000 years kung asa naging super katugnaw ang Northern Europe and nibalik rag ka warm or milder ang condition ato nga time when the fresh water drained down to the Mississippi and dili na sa North Atlantic. Usa pud sa dakong pangutana pertaining to the conveyor belt's mechanism is ang possible effect sa increase sa carbon dioxide or CO2. Some climate models predict that carbon dioxide levels increase, more precipitation will fall over the North Atlantic. And this situation reduces the density of the seawater and slows down the conveyor belt. In fact, if carbon dioxide levels double compared sa iyang current value, computer models predict that the conveyor belt will slow and that Europe will not be as warm as the rest of the world. Now let us try to keep up with the trends of the temperature during the past 1,000 years. So the figure shows how the average surface air temperature changed in the northern hemisphere during the last 1,000 years. Various sources, including tree rings, corals, ice cores, historical records, and thermometers were gathered to reconstruct the temperature profile. Kung mapansin ninyo, about 1,000 years ago, ang Northern Hemisphere was slightly cooler compared sa average temperature gikan 1961 to 1991 or kanang straight line nga makita ninyo sa graph. Though naagapon mga regions sa Northern Hemisphere nga mas warmer. For example, during this time, vineyards flourished and wine was produced in England. It indicated the warm, dry summers and the absence of cold spring. This relatively warm, tranquil period of several hundred years over Western Europe is sometimes referred to in that region as the medieval climatic optimum. It was during the early part of the millennium that Vikings colonized Iceland and Greenland and traveled to North America. Mapansin sad sa graph nga during 11th to 14th century, warm ang temperature though mas bugnaw compared sa 20th century. During this time, the relatively mild climate of Western Europe began to show large variations, and for several hundred years, the climate grew stormy, where both great floods and great droughts occurred. Extremely cold winters were followed by relatively warm ones, and during the cold spells, the English vineyards and the Viking settlements suffered. During the 1300s, Europe experienced several times where access to food supplies weren't as adequate, causing malnutrition, starvation, disease, and high death rates. Again, look at the figure and observe that the northern hemisphere experienced a slight cooling during the 15th to 19th century. This cooling was significant enough in certain areas to allow alpine glaciers to increase in size and advance down river canyons. In many areas in Europe, winters were long and severe. Summers were short and wet, and the vineyards in England vanished and farming became impossible in more northern latitudes. Cut off from the rest of the world by an advancing ice pack, the Viking colony in Greenland perished. Walay evidence nga nag-ingon nga nag-exist jud ning cold spell worldwide, pero this cold spell was likely felt sa Europe and ginatawag nila to as Little Ice Age. Now let's dig deeper and understand the temperature changes during the past 100 years. So kung makita ninyo sa figure, in the early 90s, nagsugod og saka ang surface global temperature nga almost nihit sa 0.5 degrees Celsius. After sa pagpadayon sa pag-rise, ang Earth nagsugod og kabugnaw about 25 years or so. Tapos sa late 1960s to 1970s, nag-undang ang pag-cool sa Northern Hemisphere. Tas sa mid-1970s, nagsugod ang warm and Northern Hemisphere until the 20th century. In fact, over the Northern Hemisphere, the decade of the 1990s was the warmest of the 20th century. Kung asa ang 1998 and 2005 na consider as the warmest years in over 1,000 years. it appears that the increase in average temperature experienced over the northern hemisphere during the 20th century is likely to have been the largest increase in temperature of any century during the past 1,000 years, which is observable Manhattan graph on temperatures the past 1,000 years. The average warming experienced over the globe, however, has not been uniform. The greatest warming has occurred in the Arctic and over the mid-latitude continents in winter and spring, whereas a few areas have not warmed in recent decades, such as areas of the ocean in the southern hemisphere and parts of Antarctica. The United States has experienced less warming than the rest of the world, and moreover, most of the warming has occurred at night, a situation that has lengthened the frost-free seasons in many mid and high-latitude regions. Although in recent decades, the warming has been equally distributed day and night. Ang pag-change sa air temperature nga makita sa graph kay gikan sa three main sources. So, sa air temperature over land, air temperature over ocean, and sea surface temperatures. There are, however, uncertainties in the temperature record. Example, during this time, recording stations have moved and techniques for measuring temperatures have varied. Also, marine observing stations are scarce. Taking all of this information into account, along with improved sea surface temperatures, the warming during the 20th century measures about 0.6 degrees Celsius. Og sa pila ka decades, ang global warming nagpadayon wherein an increase of 2 degrees Celsius was observed kada century with the 12 of the warmest years on record na nagsugod atong 1995. A global increase in temperature of 0.6 degrees Celsius may seem small, pero ang global temperatures probably have not varied by more than 2 degrees Celsius during the past 10,000 years. Consequently, an increase of 0.6 degrees Celsius becomes significant when compared with temperature changes over thousands of years. Up to this point, we have examined the temperature record of the Earth's surface and observed that the Earth has been in a warming trend for more than 100 years. So that is the end of our discussion for today, guys. So before tayo mag-end, mo ni siya ang summary sa ato ang na-learn for today or the important ones. So first is that we got to know that the Earth's climate is constantly undergoing change, and evidence suggests that throughout much of the Earth's history, the Earth's climate was much warmer than it is today. And then also, the most recent glacial period or ice age began about 2.5 million years ago, and during this time, glacial advances were interrupted by warmer periods called interglacial periods. And in North America, continental glaciers have reached their maximum thickness and extend about 18,000 to 22,000 years ago and disappeared completely from North America by about 6,000 years ago. And the next is the Younger Dryas event, represents a time about 12,000 years ago when northeastern North America and northern Europe reverted back to glacier conditions. And lastly, during the 20th century, the Earth's surface temperature increased by about 0.6 degrees Celsius, and this global warming has not only continued but over the last several decades has increased to about 2 degrees Celsius per century. So, thank you for listening, everyone. That is the end of our topic for today.